My parents forgot my birthday year after year while focusing on my sister. After years of being overlooked, I stopped reminding them, stopped asking for attention, and eventually moved away to start my own life. I always knew I was the easy kid. My parents made that clear early on. Ryan, you're so independent you don't need as much as Madison does, and I believed them. I tried to be understanding to accept that my little sister needed more care, more attention, more love, but even easy kids need something. When I was younger, I used to dream of big birthday parties of surprises waiting for me when I woke up. But by the time I was 8, I had already learned to lower my expectations. That year, I still held on to a little hope. I remember waking up the morning light streaming through my window thinking maybe, just maybe they had planned something for me. I padded into the kitchen still in my pajamas expecting balloons or at least a happy birthday waiting for me. Instead, my mom was busy packing a bag stuffing medication bottles and extra blankets into it, while my dad sipped his coffee reading over a medical bill. "Morning," I chirped, waiting for some sign that today was special. "Morning, honey," my mom said distractedly. "Get some cereal, okay? We have to take Madison to the specialist today." I hesitated. "Right. Today's my—" A sudden groan from the couch cut me off. Madison curled up, clutching her stomach, whimpering in pain. My mom rushed to her side, stroking her hair. My dad stood already grabbing the car keys. I just stood there. They hurried out. My mom calling back, "We'll be back later, Ryan." "Be good," and then the door slammed shut. That was the first time they forgot my birthday. It wasn't the last. Later that evening, when they finally came home, they were exhausted but cheerful. "Madison was so brave today," my dad said, ruffling her hair. "The doctor said she's improving a little." I forced a smile. "That's great." It wasn't until the next morning that my mom suddenly gasped while pouring her coffee. "Oh my God," she muttered. "Ryan, yesterday was your birthday, wasn't it?" I nodded slowly, staring at my untouched breakfast. She rushed over, squeezing my shoulders. "I'm so sorry, baby. Things have been so hectic. We'll do something later this week." "Okay?" Later never came. Instead, she handed me a $5 gift card, the kind they keep near the checkout lanes for last-minute shoppers. "Go get yourself something nice," she said with a tired smile. It was meant to make up for it, but all it did was confirm what I had already started to suspect. I didn't really matter. As the years passed, I got used to being the afterthought. School events, soccer games, even small things like weekend outings, I was always the one left behind. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't that they didn't love me. It was just that Madison needed them more. At least that's what I told myself. When I was 10, I dared to hope again. Double digits felt like a big deal, something worth celebrating. I had been dropping hints for weeks, talking about the arcade downtown, mentioning how cool it would be to have a pizza party at home. My friends were all having parties, their parents making a big fuss over them, and I figured maybe, just maybe, this year would be different. But as the day drew closer, there were no whispers of secret plans, no gifts hidden around the house, no excitement. The morning of my birthday, I came downstairs, heart pounding, searching their faces for recognition, but there was nothing. Just my mom on the phone arranging a new therapy session for Madison, and my dad already dressed for work. No happy birthday, no smile. I sat at the table staring at my cereal while they talked about Madison's pain levels, her new medication, how they needed to adjust her schedule. I could feel the words bubbling in my throat, but I swallowed them down. What was the point? It wouldn't make them remember. It wouldn't make them care. At school, at least, my friends remembered. Chris, my best friend, grinned as he pulled out a crumpled dollar bill and some coins. "We all pitched in," he said proudly, handing me a small cup of ice cream from the cafeteria. I laughed, pretending it was enough, and maybe for a moment it was. But when I got home, reality settled in again. There was no surprise waiting for me, no cake, no mention of my birthday at all. My mom was too busy, my dad was working late, and Madison had been having a rough day, so everything revolved around making her comfortable. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, telling myself it didn't matter. It was just a day. The next morning, my mom finally realized. "Oh, Ryan." She sighed, guilt written all over her face. "I'm sorry. Things have just been so crazy." She promised we'd do something over the weekend. The weekend came and Madison wasn't feeling well. Instead of a celebration, we spent the day watching her favorite movies. My dad picked up a small grocery store cake, vanilla, not even my favorite, and set it on the counter with a quiet, happy late birthday bud. I nodded, but inside something shifted. It wasn't about the cake. It wasn't about presents. It was the realization that I was always going to come second. By the time I turned 12, I had stopped hoping altogether. I didn't drop hints. I didn't ask for anything. I woke up that morning, did my homework, played video games, and helped around the house. This time, at least they remembered to say happy birthday. My mom gave me a quick hug. My dad clapped me on the shoulder, and that was it. No party, no special dinner, just another day in a house where I was more of a guest than a son. I think that birthday hurt the most not because anything dramatic happened, but because of how painfully normal it was. It wasn't neglect out of cruelty, it was just habit. Over time, I learned to stop expecting anything. I poured myself into school, into soccer, into anything that made me feel like I existed. I spent more time at Chris's house where his parents actually asked about my day, where I was invited to stay for dinner without being an afterthought. When I got my first high score on a big test, I brought it home excited to show my parents. My mom glanced at it, nodded approvingly, and then immediately turned back to discussing Madison's latest doctor visit. I never brought home another test again. Instead, I started waiting for the day I could leave. By the time I hit my teenage years, I had stopped expecting my parents to notice me. It wasn't that they were cruel or outright dismissive. It was just that their world revolved around Madison, and I was just the easy one, the healthy one, the kid who could fend for himself. I figured if I didn't ask for much, maybe I'd at least avoid disappointment. When I turned 13, I had a soccer game that I had been looking forward to for weeks. It was an important one, the semifinals of our district tournament. I knew my parents were busy, but I still mentioned it to them a few times just in case. They gave me vague nods, the usual half-hearted, "We'll see," that never really meant anything. Deep down I knew they wouldn't come, but some stupid part of me still held on to the tiniest sliver of hope. The game was incredible. I scored the winning goal in the last few minutes, and my teammates piled on top of me cheering. The coach ruffled my hair, telling me I had talent. Parents swarmed the field, hugging their kids, taking pictures, celebrating, and me, I just stood there glancing toward the empty bleachers. Chris's parents came over instead. "You were amazing, Ryan," his mom beamed, giving me a side hug. His dad clapped me on the back. "You should have seen yourself out there, kid. You've got a real gift." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Thanks." Chris must have noticed something in my face because as we walked toward the locker rooms, he nudged me. "They didn't come, did they?" I shrugged. "They're busy." It wasn't a lie. When I got home, my mom was at the kitchen table filling out insurance forms. Madison was asleep on the couch, her face pale, looking exhausted. My dad was on the phone, his voice low and serious. I stood in the doorway for a moment, waiting, wondering if I should say something, but then I saw my test from school sitting on the counter. I had gotten a 98% on my math exam, a huge deal for me. I had left it there that morning hoping maybe someone would notice. It was still exactly where I had left it, untouched, as if it had never been there at all. I turned around and walked back to my room without a word. At 15, I started spending even more time away from home. If I wasn't at soccer practice, I was at Chris's house or wandering around town, anywhere but home. There I was, just a shadow. It didn't matter if I was doing great in school or struggling, if I was happy or miserable. No one really saw me. My grandparents were the only ones who made me feel like I existed. Grandma Jean had this way of making even the smallest things special. Every time I visited, she'd pull out her old stained recipe book and let me pick something to bake. "You're in charge today, Chef Ryan," she'd say, with a grin, tying an apron around my waist. I didn't care about baking. Not really, but I cared about those afternoons. They were mine. Grandpa Walter was quieter, but just as steady. His basement was filled with model trains, a whole miniature world he had built with his own hands. Sometimes I'd sit with him for hours as he adjusted tiny houses and trees, making sure everything was just right. "It's about the details," he'd say. "The little things matter even when people don't notice them." He didn't know how much I needed to hear that. When I was 16, things at home reached a breaking point. Madison had been having a particularly bad week and the house felt heavier than usual. I had learned to keep my head down to stay out of the way when things got tense, but one evening I was in my room playing a game, one of the few things that helped me escape for a little while, when Madison barged in. "Turn it off," she snapped. I barely glanced up. "It's not even that loud." "I don't care. I don't feel good." I sighed, but kept playing. It was one of the only times I had something to myself, and I wasn't going to give it up that easily. She didn't argue. Instead, she stormed over, grabbed one of the controllers, and threw it. It smashed against the wall before clattering to the floor. I jumped up. "Are you kidding me?" She didn't even look guilty. "I told you to turn it off." My parents rushed in at the sound, their eyes immediately darting to Madison, who was now crying. "What happened?" my mom demanded. She broke my stuff. I gestured to the controller, the now broken console on the floor. Madison wiped her tears dramatically. I didn't mean to. I was just in pain, and he wouldn't listen to me. And just like that, I was the villain. Ryan. My dad sighed, running a hand over his face. Come on, she's having a rough time. You know that. Yeah, well, so am I snapped. But I guess that doesn't matter, does it? My mom looked at me exasperated. Ryan, we don't have time for this. Of course they didn't. I didn't say another word. I just turned around, walked out of the room, and slammed the door behind me. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, realizing something I had probably always known deep down. Nothing I did would ever be as important as Madison's needs. I could scream, break things, disappear for days, and they still wouldn't see me. The next morning, my mom knocked on my door hesitant. Ryan, we're thinking about trying family therapy. Would you be open to that? I almost laughed. Therapy after 16 years of being ignored. What was the point? But some tiny, desperate part of me still wanted to believe things could change. So I nodded. Yeah. Okay. Maybe, just maybe, they'd finally hear me. I started coming home later and later. At first, my parents didn't even notice. I'd stay at Chris's house after school, help him and his dad work on their car in the garage, or waste hours at the park just to kill time. Being anywhere else felt better than being home. One evening, I walked through the front door and my mom barely looked up from the dinner table. You need to start telling me where you are, she said, absently cutting Madison's food into small pieces. I dropped my backpack near the couch. I'm always at Chris's. You should be home, she said. We don't know what's going on with you lately. I almost laughed. They had spent my whole life acting like I wasn't there, and now they wanted to know where I'd been. Instead of arguing, I grabbed a plate and served myself some leftovers from the fridge. Madison had a rough day, my dad said after a moment, rubbing his face. Her pain's been worse. The doctor's adjusting her meds again. I nodded, already knowing what came next. The usual cycle. The exhaustion, the discussions, the concerns. They never asked how my day had been. A few nights later, I overheard my mom talking to my dad while I was in the hallway just out of sight. I'm worried about Ryan, she said, her voice hushed. He's just being a teenager, my dad replied. You know how they are. No, it's different, she insisted. He barely speaks to us anymore. I don't know what's going on in his head. I stood there waiting, hoping to hear something, anything that told me they were realizing what they'd done, that they understood how much they had ignored me. Instead, my dad said, Lisa, we don't have time to deal with this right now. Madison needs us. We'll talk to Ryan when things settle down. That was all I needed to hear. They didn't realize they were losing me. Worse, they didn't care enough to fix it. That night, I sat in my room staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I thought about the birthdays they had forgotten, the games they had missed, the way I had always been expected to understand while no one had ever tried to understand me. If I didn't say something soon, nothing would ever change. The next morning over breakfast, I put my spoon down and said, We need to talk. My parents looked up, startled. Even Madison glanced at me, confused. What is it, honey? My mom asked. I took a deep breath. I think we need therapy. Silence. Then my dad frowned. Therapy? What for? I swallowed hard. Because I feel like I don't exist in this house. My mom looked at me like I had just spoken a different language. Ryan, of course you exist. What are you talking about? You don't see me, I said, my voice steady but firm. Everything is about Madison. Every conversation, every plan, every decision. It's always her first, and I just exist around it. My dad's jaw tightened. Ryan, that's not fair. You know how complicated things are. I shook my head. I'm not saying Madison doesn't need you. I'm saying I need you too, and I've been waiting my whole life for you to see that. My mom looked at me, eyes glossy. We never meant to make you feel that way. But you did, I said. And if we don't fix it now, we never will. They didn't agree right away. But later that night, my mom knocked on my door and said, Okay, we'll try therapy. For the first time in years, I felt like I had been heard, but I had no idea what I was walking into. The first therapy session felt awkward from the moment we walked in. The room was small with soft lighting and a few chairs arranged in a circle. The therapist, a woman named Dr. Harris, smiled warmly and asked us to sit. My parents looked tense, sitting close together, while Madison sat curled up in her chair like she didn't even want to be there. I sat across from them, feeling like an outsider in my own family. Ryan, Dr. Harris began, Your parents tell me you've been feeling left out. Can you tell me more about that? I hesitated. I wasn't sure where to start. There were too many moments, too many birthdays forgotten, too many times I felt like a ghost in my own home. I just feel like I don't matter, I finally said. Like I could disappear and nothing would change. My mom inhaled sharply. Ryan, that's not true. Isn't it? I shot back. You don't even notice when I'm not there. You didn't come to a single one of my soccer games. You forgot my birthday multiple times. You don't ask about school or my friends or anything I do. The only time you ever really talk to me is when it's about Madison. Silence stretched between us. My dad looked down at his hands. My mom opened her mouth, but no words came out. Dr. Harris nodded. Lisa Mark, do you see where Ryan is coming from? My mom let out a shaky breath. I do, she admitted, but it's not because we don't care. We love you, Ryan. It's just, Madison needs so much from us, and sometimes it feels like there's no time for anything else. I clenched my jaw. That's the thing, Mom. It's always about Madison. Always. And I've spent my entire life just dealing with it, but I'm tired of feeling like I don't exist. Madison finally spoke up, her voice sharp. So what, you want me to apologize for being sick? I turned to her, anger flaring in my chest. No, Madison. I want Mom and Dad to admit that I deserve to be part of this family too. The session ended without any real resolution. My parents promised they'd try harder, that they'd make more of an effort, and for a little while they did. We started having family nights once a week. Movies, board games, even a trip to a museum. At first it felt nice, like maybe things could actually change, but Madison didn't like it. She started making little comments, passive-aggressive jabs about how much fun we must have had without her. It's fine, she'd say, her voice tight. I don't mind being left out. The guilt worked like a charm. One night during dinner, she finally broke down, tears streaming down her face. You're spending less time with me, she sobbed. It feels like I'm not important anymore. My parents immediately rushed to comfort her. Oh, sweetheart, that's not true. My mom soothed. We love you so much. And just like that, everything shifted. The outing stopped. The focus snapped back to Madison. I should have seen it coming. A few weeks later, in another therapy session, Madison made an accusation that knocked the air out of me. Mom and Dad love Ryan more, she said, her voice trembling, because he's normal. I stared at her, stunned. What? My parents looked horrified. Madison, no, my dad said. That's not true at all. It feels like it, she insisted. Ever since we started trying to make Ryan happy, I feel like I don't matter anymore. I let out a hollow laugh. Are you serious? I've spent my whole life being ignored, and now after a few weeks of getting a little bit of attention, you're acting like I've stolen everything from you. Madison wiped her tears. You wouldn't understand. The session ended in chaos. My parents were flustered, trying to reassure her, and the therapist struggled to keep things from spiraling, but I knew then that nothing was ever going to change. When we got home that night, my mom pulled me aside. Maybe we should try a different therapist, she said carefully. Someone who can help us all feel heard. I shook my head. I saw right through it. They wanted someone who would tell them what they wanted to hear, someone who would justify why they had always put Madison first. No, I said simply. I'm done. She looked hurt. Ryan, please. I'm done trying, I repeated. It doesn't matter what I say. It doesn't matter what I do. This is never going to change. I walked away before she could say anything else. That night, I stared at my ceiling just like I had on all those forgotten birthdays, all those lonely nights. Only this time, I wasn't hoping anymore. I was planning my escape. The night I decided to leave, I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I just felt done. I had spent years hoping, waiting for my parents to see me, to recognize that I was part of the family too. But after that last therapy session, after hearing Madison twist the situation into something, it wasn't after watching my parents scramble to comfort her while my feelings were once again brushed aside. I knew I had nothing left to give. I started planning right away. I didn't have much money, but I had saved up from a part-time job I worked after school. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. College was coming up, and while my parents had always assumed I'd go to the local university, I decided I'd apply somewhere far, somewhere they wouldn't expect me to go. A few weeks later, I got the acceptance letter. A college 3 states away had offered me a scholarship. It wasn't a full ride, but it was enough to get me started. That night, I sat at the dinner table waiting for the right moment to tell them. Madison was talking about a new treatment plan. My mom was listening intently. My dad was nodding along. I waited for a pause, for a breath, for an opening, but there never was one, so I spoke anyway. I got into college. I said, my voice steady. My mom glanced at me. That's great, honey, she said, but she was still focused on Madison. I'm moving out in August, I added. That got their attention. My dad set his fork down. Moving where? Out of state. Madison frowned. Why would you go that far? I shrugged. I just need a fresh start. My mom's expression tightened. Ryan, we were hoping you'd stay closer. With everything going on, we need you here. And there it was. Not we'll miss you, not we're proud of you, just we need you here. I pushed my chair back and stood. I'm still going. They didn't fight me on it, not really. Maybe they assumed I'd change my mind. Maybe they thought like everything else I'd just let it go, but I didn't. I spent the summer packing, preparing, making sure I had everything lined up. The day before I left, I visited my grandparents. Grandma Jean hugged me tightly. I always knew you'd go somewhere big, she said. Grandpa Walter handed me a small wooden train piece, one from his collection. For when you start building your own world, he said simply. I held on to it, my throat tight. They were the only ones who had ever made me feel like I was enough. The morning I left, my mom cried. My dad clapped me on the back and told me to be careful. Madison barely looked at me. It should have hurt, but it didn't. I was too numb for that. The drive to my new life felt surreal. I watched the familiar roads disappear in the rearview mirror, waiting for some sort of sadness to hit me, some regret, but it never came. Instead, with every mile, I felt lighter. The first few weeks in the new city were quiet. I wasn't used to making my own rules, to living without the constant background noise of my family. It was strange at first not having to check in, not being forgotten at the dinner table because there was no dinner table. I got a job, made some friends. Chris called, often checking in on me. He was the only one from home who did. My parents called a few times in the beginning, but the conversations were brief. They'd ask how I was, but it always led back to Madison. She's been struggling lately, my mom would say. She misses you. I didn't know what to say to that. Did she miss me? Or did she just miss having me there to absorb the attention she didn't want? As the months passed, the calls became less frequent. I didn't reach out either. I was too busy figuring out who I was outside of being the forgotten son. Then my birthday came, my first one away from them. I didn't expect much, but when the day passed with no call, no text, no acknowledgement from my family at all, I realized something. I wasn't disappointed. I wasn't hurt. I just felt free. I spent that night with my new friends, people who actually cared, people who showed up. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone to remember me. I had remembered myself. The first year away from home was an adjustment, but it was the best kind of adjustment. I had spent so long feeling like an afterthought that it took time to accept that I wasn't one anymore. My life wasn't about waiting for someone to notice me. It was about deciding what I wanted and going after it. I threw myself into college, into work, into friendships that felt real. Chris and I still talked often, and he even visited once, joking that I had finally escaped my ghost status. I made new friends too, people who actually listened when I spoke, who asked how I was doing and genuinely cared about the answer. Sophia was one of them. We met in a literature class and bonded over the fact that we were both figuring out what we wanted out of life. She had a laugh that made people turn their heads, a way of making everyone feel important. Unlike my family, she noticed the little things. If I was tired, if I was off, if I was avoiding talking about something. One day, a few months into our friendship, she called me out on it. You deflect a lot, she said casually while we sat in a coffee shop. I raised an eyebrow. Do I? She smirked. Yeah. Someone asks about you and you turn it into a joke or change the subject. It's like you don't expect people to actually care. I shrugged, taking a sip of my drink. Old habit, I guess. She leaned forward, serious now. You know you're allowed to take up space, right? You don't have to shrink yourself just because other people made you feel like you weren't worth the attention. I didn't respond right away. No one had ever put it that way before. I had spent so much time accepting that I was invisible in my own family that I hadn't realized how much that mindset had followed me into my new life. That conversation stuck with me. Slowly, I let myself open up more. I started celebrating small wins, aced tests, promotions at work, even just making it through a tough week. And when my next birthday rolled around, I didn't wait for my family to remember. I planned something for myself. It wasn't anything huge, just a night out with friends, but it was the best birthday I had ever had. We went to a bar, laughed until our sides hurt, and for once, I wasn't thinking about whether my parents would call. I wasn't checking my phone for a message that wasn't coming. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me and I called home. My mom picked up, sounding surprised. Ryan, It's been a while. I leaned against my desk. Yeah, I've been busy. We made small talk for a bit, mostly about Madison, of course. Nothing had changed. She was still struggling, still the center of their world. Then, after a pause, I asked, "Did you guys even realize my birthday passed?" Silence. Then my mom let out a breath. "Oh, Ryan, I'm so sorry. Things have been so hectic." Of course they had. I didn't get angry. I didn't even feel hurt. I just nodded, even though she couldn't see me. It's okay because it was. I had spent my whole life waiting for them to show up for me, and they never had, and that was never going to change, so I stopped waiting. That was the last time I called them first. If they wanted to talk, they knew where to find me, but I wasn't going to chase after people who couldn't be bothered to remember I existed. By my third year in the city, I had built a life that felt like mine. I had friends who showed up, people who actually wanted me around. I had a job I liked, plans for the future, and a version of myself that didn't revolve around waiting for scraps of attention. When my next birthday came around, I didn't even think about my family. I threw another party bigger this time with music and drinks and people who mattered. Sophia was there laughing as she convinced me to do a ridiculous dance move. Chris made a post joking that I had finally learned how to enjoy life. It was the happiest I had ever been. A few days later, I called home again just to see if things had changed. They hadn't. No one had remembered, and this time I didn't even care.